All right, so this video is about one of our most successful land restoration projects to date. It is a limestone caliche quarry that they mined to make roads in the old Sentinel Peak Boy Scout camp. And we've taken this 3-acre total moonscape and we have revitalized it by doing earthworks and by doing seeding and soil amendments, and the results are amazing. I can't wait to show them to you guys. Our clients were so happy that they asked us to continue the work on the other side of the hill, the north side of the hill, and then they were so happy with that they expanded it out to the whole 12 acres. So we're gonna give you guys the whole rundown, what we did from start to finish and how it worked, so that you guys can do the same thing on your own land.
So in February of 2023, after the ice storm, we own a property right next door that is 50 acres, and there was so much tree damage there, and I had been having business, and I just decided that I was done and ready for a new adventure. And this was the last piece of property for sale at the ranch at Sentinel Peak, which had been the old Boy Scout ranch. And this had been the quarry for the Boy Scouts. And when we purchased it, there was not a single blade of grass, anything but caliche in this 3-acre plot up here.
You know, this was the leftover lot. There's 22 lots out here on 500 acres, and this was the one that nobody wanted because they couldn't figure out what to do with it, because it had 3 or 4 acres of just barren quarry. This is a green pasture now, or almost a pasture, and it had one little weed before you started, and now we've got what eventually will be a pasture. So the transformation has been remarkable.
So we knew something could grow. You just had to pour money, time, and effort into it. But no way would I have envisioned this. So when y'all first came and did a blessing on the property, it was a very magical experience, and then you guys started. And we were fortunate enough to have the rains for this spring, and it was beyond my expectations.
I think we all get a little bit of excitement out of seeing how this has changed and transformed in just a short amount of time, just in 1 year, less than a year. So Symbiosis has been a great partner. I think it's only going to get better and better every year. It will feed on itself, replant itself, rejuvenate, and I think we've got some more surprises up our sleeve.
So this is a site out in Fisher, Texas, at the top of the watershed. A very unique piece of property because half of this property sheds off to Canyon Lake, which then turns down to the Comal River and heads out to the ocean. The other half, this side, sheets off at the very top of the watershed down into Wimberley, turns into the Blanco River, and wraps around all the way to San Marcos until it heads out towards the ocean. So we have the ability to impact the very top of 2 massive watersheds in the hill country. And so when we first came out here, this entire thing was a 3-acre quarry on this side, just a single plant, they said, was growing here. And so for about a month, we just scratched very slowly, very gently with an excavator to build a mound of caliche dust that you couldn't walk on, or else you'd just sink up to your ankles in. And after that was shaped, then we went ahead and put biochar, worm castings, worm compost, composted topsoil from organic cow dairy, and mulch. And the big addition was basalt dust, a volcanic basalt dust from the Canipa, Texas Vulcan mine. And so we added all those materials, just spread them, buttered them on like toast, topped them with hardwood mulch, and then seeded the Native American seed company's horned toad restoration mix, which is that 50 varieties of wildflowers and 33 varieties of native grasses. And you know, when we started on this project, it was a real act of faith. We knew that our methods worked, but to start from an absolute stark moonscape to a ripping biodiverse wildflower wonderland within 6 months was a delight to see, and just a reminder of how much good a few people with the right intent and right design and a couple gallons of diesel can get you in the right direction very quickly. So that's where we started on this. This berm captures the top of this hillside, and it spills on this side, which then drops into a larger pond. When that pond fills, it spills back around and it wraps over to this small pocket pond. And we did the same approach on the other side of the hillside this year. So this is 1 year from when we began, and the other side of the hill we just completed about 3 weeks ago.
And we created what are called berm and swales. It's basically just a little trough, and then on the downhill side of that there is a little valley that we've created. So it's like a giant speed bump, and it's all on contour, which means it's all at the same elevation. So water will fall down the slope and it will get stuck, it'll get captured, and it'll sit level here on the side of the hill. And that will allow for the water time to actually infiltrate into the ground. And we've created these micro wetlands, these micro wet spots that are fertile areas that we then went and seeded with a variety of native wildflowers and native grasses. And hopefully, as we are seeing, many of those things have made it to seed. They have survived, most of the summer, and they're going to go to seed, and they're going to just continue to spread and proliferate on this property. So we're kind of trying to tip the right dominoes to accelerate ecosystem restoration, which I think would normally happen on this landscape. It would happen naturally, but it could take hundreds of years, literally, because of how degraded the landscape was. So we've just massively shifted the timescales. One of the things that we did to encourage success of the plants that we seeded on these berms is we added biochar, we added basalt dust, which has minerals. It's also called enhanced weathering, where there's a chemical reaction that takes place that helps sequester carbon when rainwater hits on that basalt dust. We brought in some organic dairy cow manure, compost, and we just created a fertile starting place for these specific berm areas that are already being passively irrigated. There's a couple of pocket ponds throughout the property as well that are going to hold even more water, especially in our deluge flood events that we have here in Texas. And yeah, it was an amazing surprise to come out here and see how quickly the landscape was responding to our changes. I think we were all expecting maybe a 5 or 10 year turnaround on revegetation, and 6 months later we have lots of native grasses growing. Little blue stem, we saw side oats gamma over there, and many different species of wildflowers, sunflowers. So it's only going to continue to improve and change over time, and I look forward to seeing that evolve.
Yeah, so when we're dealing with such steep properties like this, the name of the game is slow down the water by any means necessary. So up here on this edge, they may have whatever their plans weren't exactly clear because they're building some structures up here. So we just put a brush berm as high on the edge of the property and then just backfilled it with basalt dust, compost, worm castings, and biochar. So that when the water hits this, it just becomes this mineral life reservoir that then slowly seeps through this brush berm and then just leaks all that across the hillside. And then wherever the minerals are, then we put the seed mixes. So then you just have this arc of life dribbling as a kind of a slow titration across the hillside. And then generally, just as we can see the water speeding up, we want to put another break, brush berm, or these larger conservation terraces, or these rock berms. By any means necessary, just slow the water and the system will heal itself. And so that's generally our approach. Is some areas are more appropriate for brush berms where we can snake them through the tree line. Other more open areas are more appropriate for a large scale 10-foot wide swale, 10-foot wide berm, big old conservation terrace that will hold about 18 inches of water per linear foot whenever it rains, not accounting for in-soak and what's trapped in the soil, yada yada. but basically we're just trying to capture as much water as possible and let it in-soak, seep into the landscape, recharge the aquifers, and pop up as springs lower in the hillside. So right here is a perfect perspective. We can see our small brush berm. We go down, we have a rock berm in an area that was too steep to do excavation. Further down we have kind of this shelf terrace, and then we have these conservation terraces. This conservation terrace moves water to here, it drops it in this conservation terrace, it moves water over into the large pond, which then nudges water to the other side of the property and stores it in that pocket pond over there, as well as this pocket pond right here. So we're capturing this entire hilltop and letting it seep, soak, and enter into the soil. And then you can see just below it is the next series of brush berms all the way down to the edge of the property.
It's a great example of a more mature brush berm with just this cedar log that we laid down here, and then a bunch of detritus is building up. We have this big blue stem growing, super happy, healthy, desirable grass that is established from seed in this area. And you can see this wall of green that is going to be, starting to move its way back as more and more detritus is captured and water is slowed in this area. And so this is what we're looking for, is that revegetation with a really subtle, small, low energy intensive intervention.
We've got a brush berm that we're building here with this cedar that was thinned from the land. And one of the things that about this is the first place that I worked when I first got into land regeneration projects was a 1,000-acre ranch, and he had used the NRCS grant for cedar clearing, but he did something different. He got them to help him pay for that, but he put them on contour in berms like this, and he did it all over the ranch. And I don't think very many people have done that. Usually they burn it off. But the thing was, they were like 6 feet high, and they had been there already for 20 years whenever I started working on that ranch, and they were not decomposing very quickly. So I thought, wow, that's a really cool thing, and it creates a lot of wildlife habitat, but it'd be great if they could decompose faster and actually turn into berms. Enter Sam the fungi and his mycelium and mycological knowledge. And so he and I partnered up a few years ago, and we started building myco-berms, which is brush berms with mycelium. And Sam, can you tell us a little bit about how the mycelium helps to break down the cedar?
Yeah, absolutely. So this particular type of mycelium is a saprophytic mushroom type, where it's coming from a mushroom farm. So this is technically their waste product, and it's the perfect inoculant for this type of material, woody material that you want to break down a little bit faster, especially cedar, because it has such high antifungal compounds in it. You really want to give it kind of a jump start in its decomposition process, and that comes from the enzymes that are produced by these saprophytes. So the saprophytes specifically, they digest wood. So they're decomposers, and what they have in them is enzymes that take the double carbon bond that make up lignin, and it breaks it open. So it's lignaceous, meaning it's eating lignin and it's breaking it open and taking all those nutrients that were trapped up in that tree and allowing it to be bioavailable to the grasses and to the other trees that are in the area. And in some cases, especially in the areas that we have hardwood in our berms, we can add this and actually produce food from it. So
nice.
Yeah,
so just to break it down and keep it, make it real simple here, how do you build a brush berm? You go through, you selectively thin the cedar, you put it on contour, so as the water's coming down perpendicular to the contour, it's going to hit that and slow down. You go to the mushroom farm, you get their spent mycelium blocks, you take them here, you break them up, you put them in the berm, and then if you can, you put some mulch on top of that, or you put something else on top of that just to cover the mycelium to help it hold moisture, and then the mycelium is going to break this down, and it's basically over time going to turn into a soil berm, which in some places you don't even have enough soil to do that through excavation. And this is also a more cost-effective way to slow down the water, and you can sometimes produce some mushrooms which you can eat along the way. And it gets around the fact that we live in a brittle environment or a brittle ecosystem where unless something goes through the gut of a ruminant animal and it's not in contact with the ground for moisture, it'll sit there for 20 years and it will not break down. So this is a way to get it to break down while also slowing down more water and producing biodiversity, and it benefits the trees that you don't clear because they all have fungal relationships.
Absolutely, yeah. So when you add these saprophytes in here, you know, the saprophyte is like that one cousin that when you invite them to the party, they invite the aunt, the uncle, the other cousins, their friends, and then all of a sudden you have a full house and you're like, how did I get so many people out here partying? That's the saprophytes. They bring in the mycorrhizae, the other endophytic fungus that exists in this land but might not have a good stronghold because, like Mike was saying, we live in a brittle environment and it's hot and it's dry and then it's really wet and it's humid, so all these changes can really impact the biodiversity, specifically with the fungal biodiversity in the soil. So when we put these in here, we're increasing the ability for fungus to have a home. So even if this doesn't produce mushrooms, doesn't break down anything in the brush pile, and it just sits here and just looks pretty, it's doing more than just looking pretty. It's actually holding and harboring space for more fungal allies to have a home.
What's a mycorrhizal fungi?
So a mycorrhizal fungi is mostly ones that you can't see in the soil. There are a couple that produce mushrooms, but for the most part, mycorrhizae is going to be kind of like the wood wide web, the Earth's internet, the hidden mycelium. You know, you're going to see it if you're walking in the forest, kind of like if you're walking, you move some of the duff. Actually, we probably could do it right here. You know, you're walking over here, you move some of this, you're going to find some mycelium. There it is, right there. You'll find mycelium eventually. So that is mycorrhizae.
So it has nutrient exchanges with the trees?
Right, that's pretty much its only purpose. It exists to be a bridge between different life forms. It's kind of it's an amazing mediator and connector. I would say it's like a soil counselor, you know, because it's taken all these different modalities of life like bacteria, microbes, trees, shrubs, grass, and it's bringing everybody together and having them sit down at a table and have a conversation where it's like, well, you have this and they have that. Why don't we just share those things and then you both benefit?
It's translating, communicating, and exchanging nutrients between different kinds of life forms that otherwise wouldn't be able to connect in that way.
Right on.
What you said, endo?
So endophytic, yeah. So endophytic, 98% of plants that you see around you have a relationship to fungus, and that's usually an endophytic fungus. So it's something that's inherent through the lifespan of the plant. For an example, you know, when you eat pepper plants and it's spicy and you get that capsaicin is actually formed by a fungus. And without that fungus being in there, that endophytic fungus being in there, that pepper plant would be bland and the peppers would just not really do much. They'd just be there. So that endophytic relationship causes peppers to be spicy. It produces capsaicin. You expand that to all plants and you notice that when they do have this endophytic relationship very strongly established, they can withstand drought, they can withstand cold freezes. There's a lot more range of temperature and stresses that the plants or trees can be exposed to before they start to actually degrade.
And they form that relationship when they're still a seed or when they're sprouting, or can they form it at any time in their life cycle when they come in contact with an endophytic fungus?
I would say that it could happen throughout the lifespan. That's a little bit of a theorization there, because
I'm sure it depends.
Most of the time, the likelihood that you're going to be able to isolate anything to not have it have an endophytic relationship, you would have to have it in a laboratory, truly, and you'd got to be really good in that laboratory too, like no mistakes, because the endophytes, they live on our skin. They actually live in us too. We have them in our guts, we have them in our mouth and our nose. You know, we're fungal beings too, but they have a different effect for us. So another facet around adding these saprophytic mycelium blocks to berms or even to environments, just breaking up this block right here and just spreading it over a landscape, is that these are powerhouses of fungal activity. That also includes, you know, things that are not fungus, like mold. Mold can come in and grow on these blocks and proliferate on the surface of them, and then you can spread that mold out. And you'd be thinking, why would I want to spread mold out? Well, there's a specific type of trichoderma, and you know, that green mold that you see on bread a lot. And that trichoderma actually holds back the oak wilt. And you know, this is something that's been, it's still being studied, it's still being discovered, but You know, there's about, you know, upwards of 30 species or types of trichoderma, and there's one in particular that, you know, by happenstance you can potentially get it to inoculate on your mycelium block and then put it out into your oak environment, and it's going to give those oaks a little bit of extra protection, you know, because what fungus does in the soil is it's basically like the immune system of the soil. You know, when we foster the growth of the mycelium network, we're increasing the vitality and the gumption of its immune system. We're really giving it a what for in terms of boosting its ability to survive and thrive. So putting mycelium blocks into areas that have oak trees, especially if you've already taken out some of your cedar trees, can reestablish that fungal dominance and bolster the immune system of the whole forest.
Here we have biochar. There's a big pile of it there. There was an even bigger pile at one point, but this is just showing, you know, a little sample of it. And biochar is essentially charcoal. What makes it different than charcoal is, well, one, it's not like charcoal you get in the store that has any additives or fillers or anything. It's just pure hardwood charcoal, but it's been charged with life, essentially, with microbial life and diversity. So I'll come back to that, but the reason we put the biochar into the soil and into the ground is this is highly stable organic matter. This is carbon. So we're helping to restore the carbon cycle in our soils. And organic matter, I think of it as like an energy sink. It's going to hold water, it's going to hold nutrients. If there's too many nutrients, it can balance that out. If there's too few nutrients, it'll hold on to them and keep them into the ground. It also creates habitat for microbes as well. And so you're basically adding energy storage to your land when you add biochar. And with the application rates that we used here, it's an amendment that's a one-time application, which is what we try to focus on. So we're only bringing this material in once, and then that's it. You don't have to do this every year. It's not a constant input. And so I mentioned that it's charged with life. And so we take this charcoal and I spray it with something that's called a biofertilizer. To me, a biofertilizer at the highest level is essentially just like a fertilizer. It's providing nutrients, but it is alive. It is microbially active. It's like a fermentation. I mean, literally, actually, our biofertilizer is partially created through a fermentation process. And so we're imbuing this charcoal with lots of different microbes that are going to partner up with plants and allow them to cycle nutrients, to access minerals, and even create water and attract water into the soil that we use it in. So this is a really potent one-time application that we can apply to our landscapes, and charging them with compost teas, with biofertilizers, something that's living that is going to take up residence in this amendment. And one of the reasons that we like to use biofertilizers as opposed to shelf-stable, maybe dead fertilizers, is those microbes, they literally created the atmosphere. I mean, they literally created the earth. So right now, the current conventional paradigm is we try to guess exactly how much nitrogen, how much phosphorus, how much potassium do they need, at what time do they need it. We're robbing plants of their agency a little bit. And instead of doing all that math and all that, trying to figure all that out, if we add enough biology to the soil, the microbes, they can do those calculations, and they have mastered it over millions of years, and they can help figure out exactly what a plant needs at exactly what time and exactly what proportion. This basalt dust that we have here, we also mix this with the biochar, and one of the benefits of that is this basalt is highly paramagnetic. And so what that means is it's going to affect basically the CEC, the cation exchange capacity of the soil. It's going to stimulate all the electromagnetic actions that are taking place. You know, there's a whole realm of chemistry and physics that are happening in the soil, and having that subtle amplification of the Earth's natural resonance has been shown to be positive for plants, and actually it helps sequester carbon as well. And so if you're going to apply a biochar, you might try to get some kind of a rock dust, and like I said, we use basalt to mix it with that biochar and create this weak attraction to magnetic fields. What you see here is the groundwork or the infrastructure that we've developed to help support the formation of a savanna ecosystem here. And as we've talked about, the berms and swales are creating these micro wet spots. You know, a lot of North America used to be wetland actually. And so we're slowing down the erosion, we're capturing the water on site. We're also in a contributing zone to the aquifers, so it's really important on these hillsides to have interventions like this. And then we thinned the client thinned the juniper trees, and we kept as much of that carbon on site as possible, so you can vaguely see that there's a mulch layer all over the ground there. So we're starting to increase the organic matter in the soil. We spread biochar on all of these berms and swales. That's also going to simulate what would have taken maybe hundreds of years of, you know, prescribed burning to develop this like char content in the soil, which is something that probably did happen with grasslands, although I mentioned it's a little bit of a debate in this area how frequently it was. But we knew indigenous people were using fires as a management tool. And so we've reseeded these berms and swales, and in between the features that we've created here, we're looking to see a profusion of grasses, you know, potentially hundreds of different types of grasses and forbs over time. And that would represent, I think, over 5-10 years, the reestablishment of a healthy ecosystem that is in decline in our area. And we're using the juniper trees as or not using them, but we're preserving them as a normal part of these ecosystems and keeping them, and there's still plenty of space for that profusion of pasture that people are looking for.
So here we are mid-August. We finished this phase of the project just about 3 weeks ago, and we seeded it with just a very diverse mix from Native American seed, their horn-toad restoration mix, which is basically all of their mixes combined to have the highest diversity of everything that they grow. And so there's 50 varieties of wildflower and 33 varieties of native Texas grasses. And so you can see here's a little nitrogen fixing Illinois bundleflower. We have some grasses coming up, and just a whole variety. The day that we finished seeding this, we got in a 1-inch rain, and here we are 3 weeks later in the middle of August, and the whole system is starting to come back to life. And it's just a reminder of there's no normal rainfall in Central Texas ever. You know, even this magical 34 inches of precipitation average, if you look at the rainfall, it's 60 inches one year, 12 inches another. And so, you know, I think with all of this rainwater harvesting, earthworks, everything that we're doing, just do it now and you can guarantee it will rain someday. You know, in the Mary Reynolds is a great woman who coined the term arcs, acts of restoration kindness. But also, you know, to the more biblical story, we're creating an ark. We're anticipating a massive flood at some point in the near future. We're putting all of the life forms and all of the minerals into a space where water will be held and captured. And then eventually, we're gonna come back in and plant hundreds of small trees right on the edge of this berm. So then we'll get a big wind erosion barrier, more shade, more breakage between forest and pasture, and we're just increasing the amount of boundary and surface area of forested ecosystem right next to pasture ecosystem, right next to forest, and we're getting a lot more surface area of water in contact with land, and just trying to increase the amount of surface area and biodiversity and difference of habitat across the landscape. The 3-amendment combo, I mean, first we do a brush berm, something to stop the water, slow the water right on the edge, and then right behind that we put our basalt dust, which has just been a game changer on these limestone hillsides. Biochar that's been inoculated with Chris's biofertilizer, which has also been a game changer for soaking the seeds with, inoculating them before casting them out. And a product called humus oil, which is another form of fermented compost, just super high fungal content. So we just sprinkle all that right behind our little water catchment of whatever form, and then just throw our seed bank right on top of that. So eventually it just kind of drizzles down the hillside and it's got everything that it needs.
I would add to that it's a good example of a place where technology is appropriate. You know, generally speaking, when I try to solve a problem, my first thought is like, how do the indigenous people deal with this? Because they probably already have a very time-tested method. And then there might be a low-tech solution that's maybe not traditional, but it's not requiring lots of energy. And then there's also the place for technology and high technology that can be critical to the success of different projects. And so here, hydro seeding was something that we used, especially on the other hillside, where we had a machine come in, we mixed our biofertilizers, our soluble minerals and nutrients with this machine that spread the seeds, and with like basically a fire hose that was spreading out mulch and seed at the same time. And so it was able to kind of like paint the landscape with the seed bank that would have been more difficult to do by hand, and mulched it at the same time. And I think there's great results with it, and it's a good technology to consider in certain areas.
Yeah, I was so surprised and so pleasantly surprised, because usually when there's no soil and it's that steep, you put seed down and it's all just going to wash downhill anyway. So the fact that the hydro mulcher was able to, or sorry, hydro seeder was able to stick it on to this like almost like a wall. And then it also, I was surprised to find, because it doesn't look this way, but it's all completely biodegradable, right? So there's no plastics in there, PFAS or anything like that.
Depending on the type of hydro seeder you use, some of them do have plastic mulches and things, but we didn't use any of those. So you just got to be aware of that going into it. Ask, like everything, ask what are all the ingredients that are in it, because everything has something suspicious.
Whether or not to use cover crop in general, I think it's something that we love to say in permaculture, is it depends. You know, the context is everything. It's a financial risk for one, because if you don't get good rains, if you're not irrigating them, you might spend a lot of money on seed and nothing really comes of it. But when it does make sense, it's an important way to accelerate even faster. Like the native seeds can take a year or two or even more before they really start to emerge, depending on the conditions. And cover crops, generally speaking, are going to germinate a lot faster, and they're going to create immediate coverage of the soil, regulating the temperature of the soil, protecting microbes, also slowing down erosion, providing forage, protecting that native seed bank that's gentle and just emerging, and producing lots of biomass that's also going to cycle minerals and organic matter back into the soil. I like using native seeds because the native seeds that we source are actually grown in Texas. That's an important thing to consider, is where are they coming from? Sometimes you buy native seed mixes that are come from many different states over, and they're not really well adapted to the area. And the natives are the most adapted, generally speaking, to our landscape, so they're going to need the least intervention, and they're going to start to form perennial patches in the ecosystem, and you're not going to have to continually seed them, you know, every single year. I'll mention one thing that's not happening on this particular project, but generally speaking, a good management plan, if you have livestock, can actually increase the diversity of grasses in a pasture. That's going to be outside the scope of our video, but many grasslands and prairies co-evolved with some sort of grazing animal, or many different types of grazing animals. And that animal impact can add nutrients and minerals back into the soil. It adds oxygen by breaking up compaction if you get the stalking rate right. And if you allow adequate rest, which is the really key component, the biggest problem with grazing today, I think, is that we don't allow enough rest on paddocks or in pastures. So they're just constantly regrazing and regrazing. We're not allowing the ecosystem to recover. If you get that recovery interval right, then you can see a profusion in grasses. And grasses, including tall grasses that are so lush and big that they shade out trees. And so they can prevent woody encroachment without glyphosate, without lots of burning. Just through a healthy, strong grassland ecosystem, you can maintain a savanna.
So this is such a steep hillside that we don't have a plan to graze sheep, cattle, but the one unique relationship that we have here is the landowner with her bottle-raised feral pig, her feral hog. And so we're gonna put Bartholomew, the hog, to work in these pocket ponds because they're interested in holding water longer. And when they're empty, we're gonna roll out a round bale of hay and just feed Bartholomew in there so that his hoof impact in manuring and chomping and doing everything that a pig does continues to seal this limestone bottom a little bit better, shoving all that organic matter into the soil, which is referred to as glaying. But it's a very cool, fun opportunity to see how one client with one feral hog can use that tool to seal their own pocket ponds across this property over time. So I think when I was in school for ecology, the real joyful thing that I had the epiphany of it. It doesn't matter if it's the fox and the rabbit or the client and the hog, it's the relationship of those two pieces that really weave this invisible net of ecology together, and we can do all sorts of stuff when the relationships are in the right place. And that's really what this project is really about, is putting all the relationships in the right place so that they can thrive and bring a hopeful future for all of us in the lands down below, with our springs coming back to life and more water available for all. The thing that I've learned from this is, as you learn all of these steps and ecological principles, have the faith that you know what you're talking about and go for it. There's so much degraded landscape across the planet that it needs courageous individuals just going for it, surrounding themselves with a team, so you're not being reckless or blowing budgets or spending too much money, but surround yourself in a solid team of mentors and elders and correct references, and then don't be afraid to be bold and go for a big project like this. When we started this, I was a little nervous and queasy because we were handed the reins to develop massive water harvesting on a very steep hillside that was a quarry, just an absolute moonscape, and the results that we've had have been super beneficial. And I think the last thing that I'd add is, as we're doing these bold moves forward in regeneration, remember to acknowledge and be gentle and request for support from nature itself. So when we started this, we gave a blessing, which was just an acknowledgement to these trees and to this earth and to the wind that blows through the trees and to the insects that lives here, and just basically say, hey, we're going to do our best to work with this in co-creation with the living, natural, invisible forces and beings and energies that live here, and we would like your support in any way, shape, or form that they show up. And I know myself, it helps my heart, my spirit, my soul to do this kind of work and to trudge through the hard, hot days when it feels like you have a team that's outside of just your human cadre.
There was a lot of validation in having a creative mindset that is not just doing something because it's a good practice, but because it makes sense in this particular context. And there's like some very subtle things that we did, and it's like, we were active participants in the degradation of this particular landscape. And so I think that this is a good example of somewhere where we should come in and balance some of the things that we did to totally degrade it. There might be other places where you really don't need to do anything, and you're just convincing yourself, I should do this, I should do that, and it's fine the way that it is. But here it's like, the cycle of regeneration was broken. And so little subtle things like capturing the water and not hauling off all the carbon from the cedars, but we're just reorganizing things very gently. And I think that's something that, humans are really well poised to do as a part of participating in the ecosystem. Recognizing that the plants are also really doing the regeneration. We're just setting them up. We're helping them. We're not regenerating anything, I think. We're just facilitating the natural processes that are occurring, speeding it up a little bit faster, because we sped up the degradation as well.